Hello, everyone, and welcome to the June edition of Techspert Talks. I'm Troy Rainey, and I'll be your host for today's session. Today's session is Migrating to Qlik Cloud from QlikSense Client Managed with our own Savraj Rakar and Hudson Pike. Sav, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Troy. So I'm Senior Manager at Qlik Cloud Professional Services, been with Qlik for 9 years, and main focus is Qlik Cloud. We're helping customers to migrate over to cloud, migrate all of their content, all of their applications, and really get successful and get up and running on Qlik Cloud.
Great, thanks. Hudson?
Yeah, thank you, Troy. My name's Hudson Pike. I'm a senior Qlik Cloud consultant, and my focus is everything in cloud. So I spend a lot of time creating automations, working on migrations for different customers. Been at Qlik for around 2 years and based out of Barcelona.
Awesome. Today, we're going to be talking about how to plan your migration to Qlik Cloud, what that migration journey looks like. We're going to be discussing a lot of tooling and how professional services can automate that process, make it easier for you. Now, Sav, for QlikSense enterprise customers who are looking at using Qlik Cloud and migrating their apps to Qlik Cloud, what do they need to know?
That's a great question, Troy. So upon purchasing Qlik Cloud, you're actually given a choice to make. You want to choose your tenant location wisely. We've had some recent additions in the UK and Germany and Japan, but the right location is really important for performance and for speed of access. You need to be aware of where your users are located and where your data is located, along with any data sovereignty and privacy rules. We also have Qlik Cloud Government for the US customers, and that's obviously FedRAMP authorized as well.
What does the cloud architecture look like?
For a typical QlikSense client-managed customer and an environment that they have on-prem, so your client-managed environment may well have an on-prem database, your QVD storage, a file repository attached to it. There may also be imprinting for reporting and some mobile users.
Can QlikSense enterprise customers already publish on-prem apps to Qlik Cloud?
They can, exactly. So you can distribute apps to Qlik Cloud straight away to get users over to Qlik Cloud and starting to migrate your consumption over.
All right, well, what would a full cloud implementation look like?
That's the golden question, Troy. So connecting your QlikSense client-managed environment over to cloud is great, but actually what you want to do is start to connect the data layer to Qlik Cloud, and that's the first step that we take. So we have various ways of doing that. For customers who have typical on-prem databases, we can connect to that database using Qlik Data Gateway Direct Access. That's a lightweight appliance that we have installed inside of your infrastructure. It's a secure tunnel, and we can access that database like it was on-prem.
Yeah, we've done sessions on Data Gateway in the past. I can link further resources on that for people who haven't heard about it.
Perfect.
That's great.
And part of that data strategy as well is we can go ahead and directly connect to cloud data storages. And that's Snowflake, that's your SharePoint, your S3 buckets in AWS. And this is ready for us to connect to Qlik Cloud. So that's not a problem.
Okay. So how can you help customers plan for this and actually do the migration?
So we can help. We want to start with what the strategic direction is. Potentially with customers also migrating their databases and data warehouses over to the cloud, then typically your analytics layer is the next step. So aligning the project with future needs and data strategies. We'll also prepare and implement. We want to see where your stakeholders are, who are your end users, and then do a key dependency review. You need to think about this like a project.
Right.
And then an on-premise environment review. So how many apps you have in total and what the size of the data is. And then optimizing, and that's about making the most of cloud and managing and measuring what that adoption looks like.
So what does a migration journey look like?
So we typically start with an assess phase, and then we move into mobilize, and then migrate and optimize. These 3 phases are the core of our Qlik professional services approach. I put education there as well, and education is part of Qlik's services that we offer and get the users quickly up to speed with the differences between QlikSense and Qlik Cloud. And from there, the assess phase is really just assessing your readiness to move. The mobilize phase then sets up the tenant, gets everything ready, and then we'll move into the migrate and optimize. And then we can operate and govern and help you establish monitoring and governance processes to ensure ongoing success.
Besides manually looking at all the data connections, apps, and users, I'm aware that on the Migration Center, there's a migration app. But what kind of approaches would professional services use to help with the assessment?
Yeah, that's a good question, Troy. The SaaS Readiness app that's available on the Migration Center, that's a more of a lightweight, give you an idea of which applications you have on premise and which tiers that they fit in. So with professional services, we have a much deeper dive application that can go into your ClickSense client managed environment and really scrape all of the information that we need and present it in a much better way. And you get that through professional services along with all of the activities that we do as well. The workshops, identifying the challenges and giving you that remediation plan.
You mentioned the tiers. Let's talk about licensing. What protections are in place for cloud licensing?
Yeah, so this is really important. And the entire point of the assessment is to make sure that you are comfortable as a customer to migrate to cloud. And Qlik Cloud has some guardrails. It's there to protect all customers. So for standard tier, which is available to all customers of Qlik Cloud, that's 5 GB. And we want to make sure those applications that can fit within the standard tier are prioritized, ready to go. Those that maybe need a bit more capacity and support, that's what we will flag, and we make sure that you have a plan to migrate those as well.
Is that 5 gigs on disk or 5 gigs in RAM?
That's base RAM for opening. So that's in
Okay.
memory.
I imagine the first step is setting up that cloud tenant, like setting location. You showed that map earlier. What else is involved in that mobilize phase?
So the mobilize phase is one of my most exciting phases. We're really setting up the tenant and the identity provider. That's what gets the users authenticated and logged into Qlik Cloud. The data connectivity will also create all of the spaces. So one of the big differences between ClickSense Client Manager on-premise and Qlik Cloud is the streams are no longer, and we have spaces to
Right.
govern applications and content. We'll also organize any IT-related activities, so email setup if you want to integrate with Microsoft Teams, which is possible with Qlik Cloud. And we'll also import any themes and extensions you used on-premise, and then finally confirm the migration backlog.
That is exciting. So, Hudson, I understand you've gone through the basic steps of setting up a tenant. What's that first step? Do you need to start with the users?
Yeah, exactly. So this is basically an empty tenant that I've configured. We've got no spaces, we've got no applications. If I hop over to the management console, we have only myself as a user and then just some of the configuration that I put into the tooling.
So, what's the first step then after you get this tenant set up?
We'd first integrate groups. Now, the groups are mapped from the identity provider.
Sure.
Those groups give the permissions needed to operate the tenant. During like a migration services, we would automate this process fully. I can show you an example of this here. I've created an automation that is ready to be plugged in.
And what will this automation do?
So we've got an Excel insert here. So essentially, this is just mapping kind of A to B.
So this is how you list out all those groups. I see we got
Exactly.
roles, prepping for that automation that will move all the users and groups over to the tenant.
Yeah, exactly that, Troy. We've got all the groups that would be required in Qlik Cloud. We've got some roles mapped out for the specific groups. We would essentially just go here, run the automation. It's going to go ahead and create the groups if they don't already exist. It's going to
Okay.
assign roles, and these are tenant level roles. And just like that, it's done. Now we have got groups in Qlik Cloud.
This automation, is this something that's available from a template, or is this something customized by professional services?
This automation here is something that we've put together from professional services just to make customers' lives easier.
Well, I'd say it's pretty awesome.
But I mean, it just shows the possibilities you've got with automations. What we can also do, I've got a QC mistake group here, so I can adjust the flag down to delete. And for the data user role, I actually missed to add data admin to that role. So I can just go ahead and update that.
So you can use this type of automation for operational maintenance.
Exactly, to keep the tenant in sync. So
That's
you can
very
see
cool.
here, rerunning this, we're going to just ignore the 3 that we cleared completely. It realizes QC admin already exists, QC mistake was deleted, and the data admin role was assigned.
Awesome. What's the next step after groups?
The next step will actually bring some users into the tenant. I've got Sav here, and I've got my other colleague, Dinara. So
Okay.
I'm just going to quickly create these users so we can start mapping things over to them. And then we are going to start creating spaces where everything exists in. It's where permissions are set, giving permissions of who can access particular applications, being able to just simply view or being able to create. I'm going to create these spaces here, and I'm just going to run the function. And then finally, we're going to set the group that will have the different roles, users that can contribute, users that can edit, and this is where that would take place. And all of this is built with the customer to make sure that everything's kind of mapped up correctly within cloud. So we've now got spaces mapped, so you can see the development spaces, the managed spaces. And if I go into the particular spaces, now after we've ran all of these automations, you can see that we have got the groups assigned. So when users log in, they will automatically get access to the spaces that they need to.
That's amazing. But what would be the alternative to this automation that simplified all these processes without having to go in manually, creating each space, assigning roles to those spaces, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I mean, the alternative to automating it is actually manually doing it. So we do give the function to add new. You can create spaces. You've got different types of spaces. Within the spaces themselves, you can adjust and assign members. For example, we can actually just give individual access. So you can manually do this.
What step in this process is a common roadblock or can cause some headaches?
So the change from security rules. So security
Okay.
rules don't exist within Qlik Cloud. So what we
Right.
do is we map a lot of the permissions, and the kind of bread and butter of this is to use groups. Sometimes that's a little bit of a challenge from on-premise to create like for like and having the groups created as are required within Qlik Cloud to give access. I find it the most successful when we actually create a clean mapping
Hmm.
that just automates the process fully.
All right. Well, now you set up the tenant with all the users, spaces, roles. What's next? You mentioned apps?
Exactly. The next step is actually to move some applications from on-premise.
This is your on-prem ClickSense server.
Exactly. So this is just a normal ClickSense environment. So if I go
Okay.
into the hub as Savraj, who's our primary user today, thanks, Savraj.
You're
Um,
welcome.
and I'm going to go to the sales performance dashboard. This is the dashboard that we've been told is required within Qlik Cloud. Sav has some private sheets down here. In bookmarks, we've got a couple of bookmarks that are only for Sav. And within stories, we've actually got a public story, but a private story.
So just exporting and importing the app file, the QBF, wouldn't bring along all those personal objects. So how do you solve that?
So what we need to do is go to the effort of actually exporting this application and then importing it, but remapping the content to the user that would exist within cloud. And
Okay.
what we actually have within professional services is a migrated tool that will actually just do this for us. You can select multiple applications to export from on-premise with private content if it exists in there and actually import that into cloud. What we're going to do is just select this one though here, the sales performance dashboard. This is the one we were just looking at. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. It's going to import that application to Qlik Cloud, and it's going to start reading who owns objects, and it's going to start publishing those objects.
Wow.
When you do this, you're actually going to create what's called as a user map. This is actually doing the user mapping between the objects that exist on premise and cloud.
So is this a table that will link the two versions of the app?
Exactly. What is needed is the link between your client managed ID and your newly created SaaS ID. And when this tie link is done together, that gives us the ability to remap content and private objects within cloud.
Okay, so
So
that
this is
creates the bridge so you can map all those personal sheets, personal bookmarks.
exactly. So the migration has worked. It's taken this application. It's already detected because we did the hydration prior with the automations that the space existed. And it's gone ahead and added this application, which has got private content in there into the space. And what it will also do is if I go to my personal space, it's made a copy of this application. This application is actually tied to the other one. For example, if I right click here and go publish, you can see that it's already got a published copy.
Okay, so it's kind of set up the workflow for you. So this is the app that developers will work on, and then when they publish, that will be the version of the app in the managed space. It's kind of the consumer end where people actually do their analytics from.
Exactly. The next step here, I'm just going to move this out of my personal space into the sales dev space. This is quite important, a bit of a change in how things work in cloud. Dev space is where all the adjustments to the app's load script would happen.
Okay.
And then when you republish this, this will overwrite the belly of the application within the managed space. This is where all the private content would exist. So we don't want to kind of
Okay.
mess that up for the users. So we'll keep this here. And then we've done the development app. So we've got that here.
Great. So to complete the process, do you now migrate those data connections? Do you have any tooling for that?
I can actually show you an example of that. So usually we'd need to go in and highlight which data is used and where it's located. So I'm going to go ahead and log in as the administrator. If we look at the applications that we actually have a QVD sales extractor.
What is that for?
That is to build the QVD layer that we need to actually reload this visualization app we saw earlier.
So how do we find out what those data connections are?
Navigate to the data connections.
All right. I imagine all of these would need to be recreated in Qlik Cloud.
Exactly. So the application that we are looking at uses this sales data connection here. If I just add I can get rid of tags, I don't really need that. If I go connection strings, you can see that highlights the folder where the data is being accessed from. What's going to be important within cloud is to either get access to that data or to create a connection to that data. Just as a demo, I have that data over here, the Qlik share data, sales data.
So we need those Excel files, and do we need that app that makes the QVDs?
Because there's no private content in this one, Troy, we don't really need the tooling that you saw before. I can just go here, go ahead and export that. We don't need it with data. I'm just going to export that application out here to bring into cloud. So for data sources, I'm going to go ahead and import here, drag in the exported app, upload that, add some data files. These data files are what we saw on premise that we need to actually create the QVDs, customer and sales data, upload them to the space. This is an example. Usually we'd need to create data connections pointing to different places.
If we're connecting to an on-premise file storage, would that be the use of the data gateway?
Yeah, and that's set up here when you hit add connection, feature search, gateway, you can see all the different configurations you can do to get access.
Sure.
For example, Qlik Cloud, SharePoint, which others might use OneDrive. There's really a lot here that you can connect to. So
yeah, it's a lot of options. That's amazing.
Exactly.
I appreciate you showing that, but yeah, let's go ahead and move on with the demo.
Okay, so we've got our data files and we have our QVD application. We're going to make a few adjustments in the load script and basically, Troy, just repointing the data connections. We've got the client managed data load script here. So this is where we were looking at on premise, where we could highlight sales data and my user, and we can see the data that it's actually using. If you're doing this for real, you would have to look at and highlight all the data that you would actually need to make this application load.
Currently, that's the library string that's connecting to that Windows folder location.
Exactly. Now, so we can reconnect the dots here.
Okay.
This would just work if we just repointed this at the files that exist within this space. I'm going to add a level of complexity here, though. So I'm going to go ahead and just drag up this Qlik Cloud data load. I'm going to show you this space awareness script. This is available to just copy and paste from articles, kind of tips and tricks of best practices for cloud.
That's really cool. So the script of this app will be aware of what space it's in and load the data from that space. So you can use the same script in your different production and development environments, and it will pick up the correct data.
Exactly. So the getSys attribute here is taking the space name, and then we're looking at the last 3 digits of that space name to understand whether we're in dev, test, or production. And that goes back to when we're actually mapping this out with the spaces, having this kind of naming structure. So
that's really cool.
I need to do just a couple of adjustments here. So what I need to do is just insert a connection string. This is the path that we need. So I'm basically saying here that if that prefix, the last 3 letters equals to dev, then we need to load the data files within dev. And if UAT, adjust it to the UAT space. Because we've pre-created the spaces, we already know that this is how the space structure looks. Now I can load this data.
So this is creating QVD files that the sales performance app will read from and putting them in the same space?
Exactly. So going back to the space itself, if I just adjust the filter to include data here, we have now got sales data QVD and customers QVD. The next step is actually the visualization app. What we'd need to do now is also make this application space aware. Open this application up, go into the data load editor, and I'm just going to do exactly as I did before. So just flicking these over. So just adjusting the data connection and then removing dev here, adjusting this to be UAT, and then just making this literal. And now this application will reload from the QVDs within this space. And if I load this now, it's detected it's in the dev space, and it's going to load from the QVDs that we created earlier.
Wow. So now the app is up and fully migrated onto Qlik Cloud. Can we take a look at the version in the managed space with the personal content as well?
There is one more step. Everything we've done here is in dev. The next step is just publish to the sales data sources space here. So we just publish it in here. We've now published this application into the managed space here. Yeah, so all I would need to do is just reload it, which would then reload the production data set, creating production ready QVDs. That is the data for this production app. So if I go back to sales dev.
Right, the script has been changed. So republishing the development space app will update the managed space app with those changes.
Exactly, meaning that this application in the sales space is actually just ready to be reloaded, and then we can access and see the private content. So that is a full end-to-end example. I'm going to go ahead and log in as Sav here, and you can see Sav has only access to the sales space. You remember before he had private sheets. You can see down here, he had a private bookmark. In bookmarks, he has those 2 bookmarks. And if I actually go back over here into storytelling, he actually has the story that we had on premise as well.
That's great. So this app has been fully migrated to Qlik Cloud with private content, reloaded, and ready for users. So Sav, what should we take away from this migration process?
Absolutely. Thank you, Hudson, for that. There's quite a few steps for migration, but once you get there, you can see the rewards. Always start with an assessment. When Hudson had migrated the application, he had already chosen that application for migration. You saw that migrating personal sheet stories and bookmarks from on-premise requires tooling. It's actually just the assignment of those objects back to the users so that what they see in QlikSense Client Managed is exactly what they see in Qlik Cloud. You'd also want to focus on establishing a Qlik data layer in Qlik Cloud. As we know with most enterprise customers, we are seeing huge QVD layers, potentially you're doing extracts and transformations inside of those QVDs. You want to migrate those first to establish that data layer in Qlik Cloud. And then potentially as you're doing that, distribute applications initially when you can. And then setting up your tenant. So this is all part of that mobilize phase, and use help if you need. And finally, keep your users up to date. So we would always advise to make sure that you train the users and make sure that they're prepared while you're doing the migration as well.
Thank you very much, guys. All right, now it's time for Q&A. Please submit your questions to the Q&A panel on the left-hand side of your On24 console. I see a few questions have already come in, so I'll just read them from the top. First question: how to license sync in a hybrid environment?
Okay, syncing a license with Qlik Cloud can be done in multiple ways. There might be the option when you're actually purchasing Qlik Cloud to have what we call a SaaS add-on, and that would allow the license server to actually link the user that has a particular license on premise to cloud automatically. We're talking now about the kind of professional and analyzer model. So if they have that, there is a possibility to do that. We can also allocate licenses within Qlik Cloud, and we can use things like automations to do that or handle that through the management console. One of the newest offerings that the Qlik have is actually the capacity model, where you don't really need to worry about syncing any licenses because you have a full user and a basic user, and you have unlimited amounts of that. So we're really trying to move away from like user-based licensing in that sense. And we suggest obviously talking to your account manager about this, but it depends really what is important and works best for each customer. But we have multiple options that we can do around making sure that the licensing is correct for particular customers.
That's great. Thanks. Okay, next question. What would be the best practice for migrating 1 or 2 apps at a time? I guess we kind of went through that, Hudson, but
yeah, so I mean, you saw during the demonstration that we had the ability to highlight multiple applications using the tool, right? Outside of that, you would be able to just export multiple apps and import multiple apps. And you can do that through just uploading them into the tenant into particular spaces. And you can upload as many applications as you want or need at the same time. For the remapping of content, obviously you need a tool to kind of go through and programmatically do that work. But uploading it, there is no limit to the amount of apps you can upload into the tenant. So you can have multiple ones at the same time.
great. Next question. What are the license costs for which cloud environment that Qlik Cloud is in? Is there any extra costs for AWS storage, for example?
I'll take that one, Troy. So when you purchase Qlik Cloud, it's kind of all encompassing within that, right? So there's storage included for you to store your QVDs to in spaces. And actually, majority of Qlik services uses AWS to run the Qlik Cloud platform. That's who our cloud provider is. So in terms of other costs, customers are more than welcome to use their own cloud file storage, right? Qlik Cloud has actually got dedicated connectors for web storages covering Amazon S3, Azure, Dropbox, Google Drive, Google Cloud, Office 365 SharePoint, OneDrive, the list can go on.
Yeah, there's plenty.
Just to add to that, one thing I found in cloud that a lot of customers say is really great is things like data lineage, classification. That's all included, right, Sav? Even reporting services is usually bundled in with automations and everything. It's just in
Yeah,
one platform at one
you get a
cost,
lot.
right?
Yes, you
Yeah.
get a lot. Yeah. And there's advantages to store your data inside of Qlik Cloud spaces too, right? Because you have the ability to catalog and use the business glossaries to really get the most out of your data.
Great, guys. Next question. How much of the Qlik Cloud UI can be locked down or hidden from a stakeholder for the simplest possible UI?
I'll take this one, Troy. From a Qlik Cloud UI perspective, other than using kind of mashups, and we see this with our OEM customers, where you are completely hiding the Qlik Cloud user interface and then you build your own custom UI out of the box natively, there's not much that is possible to be hidden, but we have secure governance and protocols that you can deploy inside of your spaces to govern the users who can access which space and to see the content within that space. But in terms of custom UI, that would be a mashup, and we typically see that with our OEM embedded use cases.
Great. Next question. How safe is the data in Qlik Cloud? Can you talk about security a bit?
Great question. When moving workloads to a SaaS platform, it's always vital to know that data will be secure and that the service provider is following open and audited processes for basically security controls. So for ClickSense Enterprise SaaS, which is what's there inside of the Qlik Cloud platform, it's been built using a secure by design framework. And Qlik also works with external parties to meet all of the applicable industry standards and or best practices of controls that are in place. So that covers things like ISO, SOC 1 Type 2 compliance, SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, TISAC, HIPAA, iTrust, obviously data privacy and GDPR. For more information, you can go to qlik.com/trust and you can get the full list of certifications that Qlik Cloud has.
That's great. Thank you. I'll be sure to include that link with the recording. Next question. What are the common stumbling blocks during a migration?
So I think I could probably take that one. The best thing is the approach and the planning to migration. So just understanding what and how things are going to move to cloud, what is going to move, making sure that's phased and that users are aware is probably the best way to mitigate stumbling blocks. One of the biggest issues is around data connectivity, and that's usually where we spend a lot of time working with customers to ensure that things are going to be accessible from cloud just as they were on premise. So usually it's a security conversation that needs to happen. Sometimes it's around authentication and how users will access, and just making sure that everything kind of is lined up and ready to move. Again, with plenty of pre-planning, we mitigate most of these stumbling blocks.
That's great. Yeah, and it was very clear that there was a lot of preparation already built into the demo that you displayed for us today, and that showed how easy it can be once you do that prep work.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Next question. How are reloads monitored in Qlik Cloud versus ClickSense Client Managed?
So I'll take this one, Troy. Reloads are monitored using community application, and you can download and install this within your Qlik Cloud tenant. It's called a reload analyzer. And that basically can load in all the data in your Qlik Cloud tenant on your schedules, on your automations that are reloading your applications. And you can see which applications are being reloaded, how long they took to reload, and what time they started and ended. We also have the automations monitor. And some of the monitoring is inbuilt into the automations overview, so you can see which ones were successful and when they ran. But there's really good monitoring and it's improving and getting better as well for Qlik Cloud as a platform. But that's how you would monitor your reloads in Qlik Cloud.
Fantastic. Next question. What is the data size cap if migrated to Qlik Cloud from Client Managed?
So there really isn't a data size cap when moving your applications from client managed over to Qlik Cloud. What I would say is that there are guardrails and limitations which are published and available on the Qlik help page. And we'll send a link and show that later on. And you have to be wary of that. And this is part of that assessment phase. And it's why I flashed up the guardrails, that big table and all the list of things that you need to be wary of. Typically, the most important thing is the size of the apps. That's the base RAM app GB in gigabytes. And as long as you're aware of which applications are your biggest, and if you have the certain capacity that you purchase as part of your Qlik Cloud entitlements, then you should be fine to migrate those over to cloud.
Great. And last question we have time for today. Are there any items that cannot be migrated?
I'll start with extensions. We always see this with customers, right? And part of our deeper assessment that you get with going through professional services as part of our migration services offering is that deep dive across your applications. We can show which applications are using which extensions, and we would always advise to go native if that extension is not supported in Qlik Cloud. Third-party extensions are sometimes an issue for customers, and we would always advise to make sure that you go native or you review the use of those extensions if needed.
Okay.
Secondly, M-printing. So M-printing is one of those where the reports themselves, although we've made some great headway with some of the Excel templates, we can migrate those and export them from M-printing and import into Qlik reporting services. Majority of the other reports and the report types would have to be recreated inside of Qlik reporting services. So there isn't a one-to-one journey over from imprinting into Qlik reporting services, but we can help with that assessment, understand the use case, and see what and how that can be recreated within Qlik Cloud. Qlik Cloud's not just got reporting services, it's also got inbuilt alerting and reporting capabilities in the platform itself. So that's alerts and subscriptions, which you can sign up to and create per application, per sheet, per visualization, and get those charts and visualizations emailed to you when an alert happens and subscribe to reports.
Yeah, and just to add, I would say that some things aren't necessarily migrated in automated fashion, and they're not migrated exactly as they exist today. Some things would need to be recreated / redesigned in Qlik Cloud. And that's just around, again, just planning the move to cloud and just how things will work. Things like security rules, permissions, we showed before, the use of groups is really a best practice. Sometimes that won't be designed in the same way on premise, and now we're mapping roles to spaces. So again, not exactly migrated, but recreating that and redesigning that in cloud is really just a key difference, I would say, from on premise.
Great. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for all the prep work and things you've gone through with us today. It's really great being able to see the whole migration journey and taking a look at a lot of the details that are involved there. I think it'd be very valuable for people going forward.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. And great questions. We went through a lot, and just to reiterate, great planning equals success.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. I hope you enjoyed it and found it insightful. If you want more information and seeing how Qlik Professional Services can help you with your migration journey, then reach out and you can see more information on qlik.com/Qlik Consulting to find out what we do and offer to customers.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this session. And thanks to Sav and Hudson for presenting. We always appreciate having experts like Hudson and Sav to share with us.
Here's our legal disclaimer. And thank you once again. Have a great rest of your day.